We are going to spend a little time this morning in Joshua. So if you are a paper Bible person, we will be in Joshua 24 for the bulk of our time. It will be on the screen as well. I will do my best. We were at camp recently, and there I'm given like 45 to 50 minutes to speak. I will do my best, okay? That I kind of got in that rhythm, so we'll see how this goes. But Joshua 24, for anyone who knows, just as a refresher, for those who may not, we get to the end of Joshua, and the Israelites have come out of Egypt. They have wandered the wilderness, and throughout Joshua, we have watched them conquer city after city. We have watched the walls of Jericho fall. We have watched all these things be laid before them by the hand of God. And now Joshua has reached the point he has led the Israelites for all of these years through all this combat and conquest. And Joshua is fully aware that his time has come. It is time. He does not have much long to live on this earth. And so chapter 24 is Joshua's parting words to the nation of Israel. And so he begins at the beginning of Joshua 24 and says this: "Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says.'" And what follows is a quick telling of all that God has done for the Israelites. Joshua tells the story of how they went from Egypt to where they are now. He tells the story of God. He tells the story of the Israelites and how they have come to the point that they find themselves. You see, back then, they were really, really good at telling story. That's how we have so much of the Bible. It's not because it was necessarily etched in stone tablets, though some things may have been. It is because telling the story was part of their culture. And they didn't just tell the highlights. They didn't just tell, some things. They shared everything. And that was part of their culture. They passed down the details. And I wonder sometimes how much of that we have lost. It's not that we've lost the appreciation for a good story, right? I mean, you look at the money made in Hollywood, the money made on movies and TV and books. Books are always better. But like right now, if I were to ask you, hey, turn to the person next to you and share, some of your favorite movies, nobody would have a problem, right? If I said, hey, turn to somebody next to you and share your favorite TV show, we would not have a problem. We love story. We're drawn in. Okay, that used to be for years. Nobody knows what a water cooler is if you're under 20, but that used to be the phrase, right, when a show was really, really popular, that was kind of the topic of conversation around the water cooler the next day, because people wanted to share, oh man, what did you think? Man, that surprise and all these, we get drawn in to that story. And yet at the same time, if I said, hey, turn to the person next to you and share a little bit about your faith story, share a little bit about the way God has worked in your life, we may start to struggle a little bit. Because I worry that in a lot of ways, we've kind of given away our ability to tell a story. We're great at receiving a good story, but we struggle now to share our story, and we struggle to tell a good story. Joshua tells the story. He tells them how they got to where they found themselves. And then he gets to verse 14, which Carson read for us. Thank you, Carson. It says, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Because of what I have just shared, because of what God has done for you, serve him. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve." And so Joshua finds himself standing before the people of Israel, knowing full well that when he leaves, they have a choice to make. And we, in the same way, have a choice to make, because no matter what, a decision has to be made. Each and every day we wake up, and each and every day we decide Who am I going to serve this day? What is my priority? What is most important? Will I take the knowledge of God? Will I take the facts of what God has done in my life and allow that to make me choose that today I'm going to worship the Lord? Or am I going to choose something else? And let's be honest, we're really good at not choosing, right? Like, we've gotten really good at, well, if I don't decide, somebody will decide for me. Okay, how many of you have had the conversation, hey, where do you want to eat tonight? I don't know. And you think by saying, I don't know, that somebody else will decide for you, right? Like, if I just don't say, I have been told that being, like, graciously, like, refusing to decide things is not helpful, right? Like, in our house, I'll be asked, like, hey, do you want this or this? And I think I'm being nice. I'm like, anything's fine. Like, that's not helpful, okay? But we're really good at not deciding, okay? But in the same way, we know in our head that if we don't decide, that's not good, right? Like, if you go to the restaurant and the waitress or waiter is like, what would you like? And you're like, I don't know. Then you get nothing. Like, at some point, like, not deciding doesn't solve the problem. And yet we try and do that with God. We say, well, God, I'm not choosing not you. I just don't know that I necessarily want to choose you today. So maybe if I just don't choose, I mean, I'm not choosing not God, but I'm not necessarily choosing God. So I'm just going to go about my day. I'm just going to do what I do, and everybody will be happy. It's fine. The problem is, not choosing not God is not the same as choosing God, if you can follow all the knots, okay? And we see that not just here, right? Like Joshua's like, you have to make a choice. We can go all the way to Revelation if you've read the first few chapters. Revelation chapter 3. If you ask anybody what that stands out about Revelation, you're going to get one of two answers. Either one, I have no idea what that book's talking about. Right? Like, I don't know what's metaphor, I don't know what's real. And this letter right here. This is the other thing people remember. To the angel of the church in Laodicea to write this. These are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot, and I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. And so the Lord himself says you have to take a stand one way or another. You can't just go through life kind of coasting in the middle and think that that's good enough. And I don't know why it is. Maybe it's because we look around at the world around us and we say, well, compared to them, my lukewarm looks really good, right? Like compared to, the world, lukewarm is a pretty high bar. Maybe we're like, well, it's hard to commit to something. That requires sacrifice, and that requires struggle. And I don't like sacrifice, and I don't like struggle. So what if I just keep coming to church, and, I'll pray before meals, okay? And we'll be good, right? Like, God, is that fair? Like, I come to church, I'll pray for my food, and we'll call that being a Christian, right? Like, we're good. And yet what we see is God says, no, that's not good enough. That's not going to cut it. I need commitment. I need to know that you're in this. Which is why back in Joshua, he says, you need to decide. And notice he says, look, if serving the Lord is undesirable to you, if that's not something you want to do, God's giving you the ability to choose. God's not going to choose for you. But you do have to choose. And so the question for us as we try to decide is what attracts our worship? What is it that we're seeking? What is it that we're after? How do we make those choices? How do we decide when I wake up in the morning on a day-to-day basis and then on a larger scale with my entire life, how do I decide what I'm going to do? I think there's wisdom to be found in a lot of places. The great theologian Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. Love Calvin. There's a 3-panel strip where he's faced with I have schoolwork to do, but I really, really want to go outside. And so he says, so I know what choice I would make in the short term. I'd go outside. And I know what choice to make for the long term. Doing my homework and doing school is going to benefit me in the long term. And then the final panel is him running out the door as he says, but I also know longer term which one's going to create the best memories. And so he runs outside. And so I wonder sometimes if we're so focused on making the short-term decision, or maybe the little longer decision, and we don't think of the end decision. That we're not thinking, well, I could go a few different ways, but I know what's best for my soul. I know what's best for me eternally. Because I worry that we spend a lot of time making our decisions in the short term. What's easiest today? What's easiest for me right now? In Deuteronomy 11:16, there we go. It says, be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them, which flies in the face of our 10 commandments in Exodus 20. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. And I think our struggle, why this is so hard for us, is, as Joshua says, references the gods of your forefathers in Egypt, or the Amorites whose land you live in. And we think to ourselves, well, I'm not worshiping foreign gods. I'm not chasing after gods of the Amorites. I'm not chasing after gods of the Egyptians. I'm just chasing after the god of wealth, or the god of popularity, or the god of self. See, God's not only concerned about these literal gods that you've placed on your mantle. He's worried about where your heart is. Where is your heart? What has attracted your worship? Worship is those things that we give our life to, those things that we have given our commitment to, that we have said, this takes priority in my life. And so we ask ourselves, has God taken that priority? But really ask yourselves, because that's one of those questions, right? With the youth group, there's questions that I'll ask where I'll say, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. I need you to not answer for 10 seconds. Because we have those gut answers, right? Like if I said, is God the most important thing in your life? Done. Every hand up. We're in church, right? Like nobody wants to be that person. So all of our hands are up. But if we really ask ourselves, is God the most important thing in your life? And you have to think about it. You have to reflect. And you ask yourself, well, did the people in my life, if they were asked, would they say that God is the most important thing in my life? Or would they say something else is? In Romans chapter 12, Paul says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Giving your life to God, that is your true act of worship. To not conform to the world, which is what Joshua was talking about. When Joshua says, you have the option to chase after the gods of the Egyptians, the gods of your forefathers. You have the option to chase after the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. We have that same option, right? Like, we can look at the way we were taught, the way we were raised, and then we do that math of whether that lines up with God. And so Joshua says, look, some of you are coming out of a place where your parents dabbled in worshiping the same gods of the Egyptians, because that's where they lived. And now you have to decide whether you're going to keep those practices or whether you're going to commit wholly to God. And so for us, we have to decide those things that we carried with us, those things that we were taught, maybe not even about religion, maybe it's just baggage that we have from when we were younger. Are we going to keep holding on to that baggage, or are we going to get rid of that so that we can focus solely on God? He says, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land she lived. This one makes a little more sense to us because what we do here for an hour and a half on Sunday morning does not translate very well to the world that we live in. When you go to work tomorrow, when you go to school in the fall, they all just shuddered. This does not translate to that. And the reality is sometimes we're just trying to get through our day. I know that's true for them. They're just trying to survive. And sometimes in order to survive, you take on the camouflage of the world around you so you can just blend in. And I don't think that's a kid problem. I think that's a heart problem. I think that's an us problem. How many things of the world have we taken on ourselves so that we blend in just a little bit? Now, God, I'm not trying to be all in. I'm not trying to be all that. I don't like standing out so much. I don't like being awkward in a conversation. I don't like being the odd man out in a crowd. And so I take on just a little bit of the world around me to make life easier. Joshua knew that the Israelites faced that same concern. It's going to be very easy to follow the practices of the world around you. That's what's easy. But that's not what's right. So Joshua says, look, you have to choose. You have to make a decision. God's given you free will. You can choose how you respond to that. But Joshua ends by making a declaration. And we do as well. Joshua ends by saying, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Now, this is not just a frilly thing that goes on your wall at home, right? Like some of you may have this sign hanging somewhere. You all know someone who does, right? Like, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And it's fine. It works. It's good. I'm not besmirching those things. But for Joshua, he makes this declaration which says a couple of things. One, my commitment to God is between me and God. Me and my family and our commitment to God is independent of what you choose. And so some of us need to understand that regardless of what is going on around us, regardless of the influences we have, the choice is still ours. The choice is still ours to say, as for me and my home, we will serve the Lord. We're not going to give in. We're not going to be drawn away because of all these other influences. We will serve the Lord. And the other is there's power in declaration, right? Like there's something about saying out loud your intentions and your purpose and what you're going to do, okay? It's one of the reasons that like people who go on diets tell people they're going on diets, right? Because if somebody you've told you're going on a diet sees you drinking your like third Route 44 Dr. Pepper, they may step up and go, I thought you're on a diet. Like, what's going on? Like, because think about it, we'll diet quietly so that if we like get off the diet, well, that's fine, nobody knows anyway. Like, I'm the only one that knows I messed up. But when you declare it, when you say, look, I'm doing this, you are inviting others to hold you accountable. You're inviting others into your life and you're saying, this is important to me and I need you to know that this is important to me. And so for Joshua, it is, as for me and my home, we will serve the Lord. When someone is baptized and they stand up and they say, I acknowledge and I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And we surround them and we get this circle going. The whole point of that circle is we're here to love you, yes, but we're also here to encourage you and strengthen you and challenge you when that is needed. And so some of us, there may be a time and a place. One of the things I tell the youth every summer is it's stressful and it's hard to go through the school year kind of a Christian. It's so hard to go through and you're doing that dance every time there's gossip, every time people are using language you shouldn't use, every time like you're invited to the party, every time all these things happen, and you're kind of like, no, I can't make it, and all these different ways because like we're afraid of getting outed as a Christian. And what I've told them is, because they're like, well, I don't want to lose friends over it, I don't want to like be Day one, walk in the room wearing a shirt that says, I love Jesus. After that, there's not a lot of tension, right? Like, it's there. Like, put it out there. Let people know who you are. That way, if you have a good friend and you walk in with an I love Jesus shirt and they're like, I'm not your friend anymore, you're like, great. I'm glad to know that about you. Like, I don't have to worry anymore. Like, I don't have to spend my entire year like kind of being a Christian so that I stay friends with you. And again, I don't think that's just a youth problem. I think some of us spend so much time going through life keeping our Christianity in our pocket, keeping it in our purse, keeping it in our backpack, because we don't really know what would happen if we were kind of open about it. And I think there's a benefit and there's a strength and there's a power that exists in just standing up and saying, this is who I am. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And so some of you may be in a place that in your life, maybe in your family, maybe in your friend group, maybe at work, you may need to look for an opportunity to do that, to be a little more open about your faith. Because if somebody's going to abandon you over that, man, it's good to just be aware of that. But on the flip side, there's also people in your sphere and in your circle that's going to open up conversation. That's going to open up opportunity. But we have to be willing to make that declaration. In Romans 10, Paul says this, "For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." There's a place and a time to proclaim the things that we believe and to proclaim the things that we know to be true about our Lord. And Psalm 96 says this, "Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all the people." If we as followers of Jesus Christ, if we as those who believe that what this says is true, a natural outflowing of that should be declaring who he is, declaring what he has done for us, telling our story, being willing to share and tell people what God has done in our lives. Because one of the amazing things about Joshua telling that story, one of the amazing things we see in the Old Testament is they understood that God's working was not just bound to their specific life. There's a reason they talk about the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, because what God did in the past was still relevant and true for them. We live in a very, very much what has God done for me lately world. Well, if I've not seen God, if God has not blessed me in a way that I can identify specifically with him in the last 72 hours, then I just don't know. And I think part of that is we as followers of Jesus, we as parents, as grandparents, as friends, need to be willing to share how God has worked in our lives. Because I know when I was growing up, I did not, in hindsight I did, but at the time I did not see it a lot because of my home, because of the way I grew up. But when I became exposed to people who had followed Jesus and had seen ways that God had worked in their lives, and they began to tell me their story, my faith was grown, impacted, and strengthened because of what God had done for them. In those moments, I didn't need God to have done those same things for me because I trusted that God had done it for them. And that's what we see in Scripture, is grandparents telling grandchildren, this is what God did in our family. This is what God has done in our lives. And so I pray and I hope that you have those opportunities to share those stories. Tell it again and again and again. I mean, we're willing to watch the same movie 37 times because we really enjoy it. Don't think that telling the way that God has blessed you in your life gets old. It doesn't. That's how we're going to affect and impact those who come after us. Those who are struggling to see God at work, they need to hear how God has been at work. We need to bring them in to our story. And so this morning, we all have a choice to make. Some of you, we all made one by being here this morning. But each and every morning that we wake up, we get to choose, who am I going to serve this day? Now, some of you have never made that public declaration. Some of you have never made that permanent choice to say, I'm ready to give my life to Jesus. Not just in my own mind, but publicly, and I'm ready to be baptized and to dedicate my life to Him. And if that is the case, then here in a moment when we stand and sing, we would rejoice if you would come down and we would have opportunity to share that with you. Maybe it's simply a time of, man, I've spent a little too much time worshiping the gods of the Amorites. Maybe I've spent a little too much time chasing after things that aren't God. And I just need to recommit today. I just need to retell God, God, today I choose you. And maybe we need to tell somebody so that they can help hold us accountable. They can help check in on us. Hey, how's your week going? How's your prayer life going? How's God working in your life? Let's normalize those conversations. Let's normalize having that as part of our interactions with one another. But here in a moment as we stand and sing, if you need to make a declaration, if you need to choose publicly, then we want to invite you to do that. If you've come this morning and you're just weighed down and you're burdened, be it physically, emotionally, spiritually, and we can pray for you or pray with you, please don't leave today without having opportunity to pray with someone. Let us help carry that burden.